This is a video of my final project on race and ethnicity class, which have been facilitated by Professor C.N. Lei for a semester. My name is Kim Joon-hun and I'm currently an MA student in Sogang University. For my final project, I have written an analytical essay which compare and contrast 4 different books on racism, which deals with 4 different races on 4 different levels. The 4 books of my choices are first, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, written by Roxane Dunbar Ortiz, Strangers in Their Own Land, written by Ariel Russell Hochschild, Stamped from the Beginning, written by Abram X. Kendi, and Trespassers, written by Willows Lung Amen. The reason that I have chosen these 4 rather recent books on racism is because I thought that they best reflect the contemporality and intersectionality of racism. I argue that racism is something obviously bad, but it is the intersectionality and contemporality makes us hard to see racism as something obviously bad. So the first book of my choices are Stamped from the Beginning, written by Abram X. Kendi. This book traces the discourse on racial stereotypes of Afro-Americans and argues that it is the racial politics, not the politics of self-interest that comes prior to racial stereotypes, not the other way around. This is to say that racial politics are being conducted not because there are racist ideas, but it is actually the racial politics that have been governed by self-interest is making racial ideas. The next book is Roxane Dunbar Ortiz's An Indigenous People's History of the United States. This book argues that there is an absence of colonial framework in American history concerning Native Americans. This is to say, the American soil have been always seen viewed as a virgin land, the doctrine of discovery, an empty land, that it was a land to be discovered. In that way, American history have been conveniently erasing the colonial framework. The third book is Ariel Russell Hochschild's Strangers in Their Own Land. This book is about the polarization of political stance in America, specifically projecting Louisiana by conducting a case study on ethnic groups of the Cajuns. This book shows that how America is now divided in politics, and the Cajuns living in the Louisiana region are having a deep story, and deep story is a sentiment of betrayal. It is a betrayal from the American dream because the people in Louisiana have worked hard for the American dream to work, but they are feeling they're being cutting out by the racial minorities by seeing them getting help from the federal government. The last book is Trespassers. It is a book about everyday battle of Asian Americans had gone through to achieve a degree of inclusion in Silicon Valley. This book projects that how Asian Americans is now successfully getting integrated in the Silicon Valley, but it also shows how hard they had to battle the racial stereotypes to achieve that state. So my final project argues 4 things. Afro-Americans has always been projected as labor force. It was Americans' idea to decide whether Afro-Americans were successful slaves or not. And theories such as ham theory, soul theory, climate theory supports the idea that Americans have always been putting black people on deciding whether they are manageable labor force in America. So this racism nowadays continues to show that Americans' tendency to decide whether Afro-Americans could be a fitful citizen in America or not. And second, I argue that Native Americans are now totally invisible. In the book, there's a chapter on the last Mohicans, and in that way, America has absorbed the Native American to them, and they became the Native Americans. In that case, unlike black people, Native Americans are super invisible. The third book on the racial ethnic group Cajuns shows the backlash of American Dream. American Dream was founded as a myth, and in that case it has to be backlashed. So this shows that white people are now being backlashed by the American Dream. The fourth are on Asian Americans, and Asian Americans were always have been projected as invaders. In the early years, they were the hordes of Asians, and now they are silent minorities that take up the Silicon Valley. So we can see that Afro-Americans, Native Americans, and Cajuns and Asian Americans, all of these four racial groups and the racist ideas towards them are connected to the intersectionality of racism, and again it evolves through time and invites contemporality. So on that basis, in my final project, I argue that it is the contemporality and the intersectionality making racism hard to us to see the bad part of racism. Thank you.